Just before we get started, who's been to an Ignite before? All right. Well, for those of you who haven't, it'll be a lot of fun. So, welcome to Ignite. It's a fun, normally beer-filled, geek-filled night. Google invited me here today to run one, and we pulled in a combination of Googlers, attendees, and cool people who've done great Ignite talks in the past. I'm Brady Forrest. I write for O'Reilly, I do a bunch of conferences, and I spend a lot of my time doing Ignites, which, in case you wouldn't guess it, I love my job. And I started this because geeks like to share. And geeks have a lot of passions. They don't necessarily want to take a whole weekend camp to explain it and talk about it. They want to share it with their friends, but a long 45-minute talk is just a little too long. And geeks like beer. So when you combine the two things together, a fun social night out at a bar with your passions and short talks and your non-geek but interested in Twitter friends, you get something like Ignite. And the way we do that is we have this fun format, and it's not showing. Sorry. Ha! So this is what you just missed. And here's where we are. And we use this format to make all the content interesting. Each speaker gets just 5 minutes, 20 slides, that auto-advance after 15 seconds. The speakers that get up here have no control over the slides. What I just did is cheating. But I feel like I had a good reason, my own incompetence. And what you're going to see today are 9 speakers who are going to take you through a variety of topics. Speakers who are here today are Pamela Fox from Google, Kevin Marks from Google, Leo Dirac, Kathy Sierra and Tim Ferriss, Mike Driscoll, and you may have an Ignite in your city and you don't know it. And if not, you should go start one. They're very easy, as you'll see. You just ask your friends to give you 20-slide presentations. You set them to all auto-transition after 15 seconds. And then you go to a bar. And you can be like any of these towns. At the last Ignite Seattle, we had almost 600 people there. Recent one here in San Francisco, we had 800. It's a lot of fun. We put the videos up online, and it's a great way to share your passions, get your name out there. If you want to see more of this, check out the Ignite show. And now, without much more ado, I'd like to welcome up our first speaker, here from Google, but an Ignite Seattle veteran, Leo Dirac. Please give it up for Leo.
Thanks, Brady. So I'm Leo Dirac. Wow, this is loud. And I'm here to talk to you about saving the world with the better alarm clock. I'm going to give you a couple strategies for waking up in the morning, the geek strategy and the hippie strategy. But I'd like to start out by taking an audience poll. So raise your hands if you regularly use the snooze button on your alarm clock. All right, now keep them up if you regularly snooze for more than 15 minutes. Half an hour? An hour? Yeah, it's okay, I do it too sometimes. The thing is, beds are comfy, and they're warm, and they often have snuggly things in them. And the alarm clock is this stupid little robot that just goes beep, beep, time to wake up and face the cold, harsh reality of your life, beep, beep. So a more effective alarm clock would say make the bed uncomfortable, suddenly, say by pumping cold fluid into the mattress or making it not horizontal anymore. But, you know, that's maybe not the funnest way to deal with it. What if getting up was really fun? What if there's something totally awesome that you couldn't do lying down with your eyes closed? Well, then you'd want to get out of bed. So what would that be like? Well, I got a couple ideas. Like, how about snowboarding? Or what if you were a superhero and you had to get out of bed every day to prevent the end of the world? That'd keep you from hitting snooze, wouldn't it? But, you know, I think each and every one of you could be that superhero because our world is facing very real threats every day. Now, nuclear war, maybe not as dire as it used to be, but what about bioterrorism? What if there was a bioengineered super virus that turned all humans into flesh-eating zombies? Or what about cataclysmic climate change or gray goo? Or, you know, if we keep going the way we have been, eventually this planet isn't going to be able to support human life at all. And how long do you think we have before that? Do you think we'll make it 100 years? 1,000? I mean, I think eventually something's going to wipe us out. And, maybe it's not even worth trying to save the human race at all. Maybe we should try and save something more important. Well, what's more important than people? Well, that's a good question. Let's put on our PM hat for a minute and go into triage mode. If you ask me, the Pry 1 is complex thought. This is ideas and emotions, logic, art. All of these things are way more important than things like, birds or plants or human beings. Because, how do you have complex thought without a human brain? Well, that's a good question. What else can support complex thoughts? Well, it sounds kind of like an engineering problem to me, and a really fun challenge at that. What if we made robots that were really powerful and could support human emotions and live lives as rich as ours? Well, that'd be one way to do it, and we're all geeks. Let's get to it. What do you say? Now, I know some people are going to miss having bodies. They're going to miss food, watching sunsets. But, people get nostalgic about all sorts of stupid stuff already. Like, boy, wasn't it nice when we all used to huddle around the campfire to keep warm while hiding from the saber-toothed tigers in our caves? I mean, come on. Let's get over it. It's time for us to move on. I see we cast off these weak, fragile human bodies and replace them with something better. Let's let the robots take over. Okay, so here's what you can do to help. First, pick a job that's going to get you out of bed every Monday morning. Do something that's really important for the world, something that's going to help the robots take over. There's two ways to do this. You can be a geek or you can be a hippie. So the geek way means do science, build technology, help people communicate, help people solve complex problems together. Because as the world gets smarter at solving these problems, we're getting closer to having the robots that we're going to need to get through this. The other thing, we got to buy more time. And that means being a hippie. And you know what this is. This is recycling. This is composting. This is peace in the Middle East. All the things the hippies have been preaching for decades are actually really important because the humans might be doomed, but we got to keep them around for long enough so they can build us V2. I mean, we have to keep ourselves around long enough to build our own replacements because I'm a human too. And this is what gets me up in the morning because I don't know. Maybe the humans will make it forever, but I'm not really willing to take that risk. I think counting on that is reckless and immoral because everything that we know and care about in this world that's important is in danger of being wiped out. And it's only by working together as geeks and hippies that we can save the world. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Leo, for telling us about Google's new product, Google Body. And now we're going to move to open source. Because we want to know what to save, we'll need to calculate that. Please welcome up Mike Driscoll telling us about R.
Thanks, Brady. So we are now living in an age of big data. Every cash register, every cell phone. I've got some extra time. Sure. Every car, every computer is streaming billions of data points. And the professor, Joe Hellerstein, has called this the industrial age of data, the industrial revolution of data. And that's great. That's exciting. Big data has become something that a lot of people are talking about. And it's not just about gathering this data. Data has become interesting. In fact, data has become something that's not just interesting. It's even become something that's sexy. In fact, Hal Varian has said that statisticians are the sexy job in the next decade. And you might be wondering, with all this data, how can I learn how to become sexy too? What can I do to make pretty charts? Well, there's a tool for you. It's called R. And it was invented by these two guys, both whose names begin with R. And R is different. It's an open source tool for statistics and data analysis. It was developed by statisticians for statisticians. And what it's great at is three things, really. Data manipulation, statistical analysis, and visualization. And I like to call these things data munging, data modeling. These are really things that belong together. And we use these tools, and we use this to build hypotheses about the world. This is one such hypothesis. Jessica Hagee, said that the more money you have, the more free time you've got. In fact, when you're broke, you've got free time. When you're rich, I decided to examine this by looking at OECD data for 29 countries. I took this data, munged it with R, and examined whether Jessica's hypothesis was right. Well, it turns out she was partially right. It turns out that if you're from Luxembourg, you're pretty rich and you do have a lot of free time. But actually, the poor countries basically don't have very much free time. So this is an example of using R for hypothesis testing. But there's a lot of bigger data out there. And this is an example of a gene array that has 100,000 data points. This is actually the chip I designed in graduate school. And we'd like to find ways to distill this data down to something we can feed our brains, a visualization that we can give. And this is what I did with R. I took those 100,000 data points and created a single visualization that tells me something about the variance on this particular chip. That's great because looking at data is not something we can just do like a computer does. Another example is credit card transactions. There'll be 1 million credit card transactions during this presentation. And we can use this data to predict something about what we consume. In fact, every time you go to Amazon or Netflix, you see questions about which products are ordered together. We can use this credit card transactional data. In fact, I used it for a particular client of mine to figure out whether or not, if you like Google I/O, you're going to love OSCON 2009. Click data. There are 1 billion clicks that will happen during this presentation, but you can use click data and pull it into R to make interesting predictions about what people are doing. In fact, the advertising guru, John Wanamaker, said that half of the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The problem is I don't know which half. Well, we can change this using data. Right here, we do an analysis using Bayesian statistics to figure out which web ads are more successful. Again, this is done using R. But now let's talk about something really important, pitches, Major League Baseball pitchers. Major League Baseball has a database of over 1 million pitches with their velocity, their location, and their speed. And we can take this data and we can build visual fingerprints for pitches. The top here is Cole Hamels, the bottom is Brandon Webb. And I've used this data to look at the kinds of pitches these guys throw. Cole Hamels is a finesse pitcher. Brandon Webb uses change-ups, ways of deceiving the pitchers. And that's great. The truth is that what we're moving towards is a way to bring data to the masses. And we have actually, because R is open source, we can put it into a web page. We don't have to have it sitting on our desktop. This is a stack I like to call Lamer. If you've got a better name, please let me know. So the reason we want to do this is because, data is out there. It's in the clouds. Well, there's no reason to be bringing all this data to your desktop. That's just crazy. And that's why we need to think about putting R into that stack. And the truth is that, I love coding. It's great. But given a choice, we'd rather be clicking on applications. If we're doing data analysis, we'd rather be clicking our way through it rather than coding our way. And putting R in the stack, using the force of open source, we can do that. So in conclusion, it's an exciting period. We live in the age of big data. May the force of open source be with you. And I hope you'll check out R. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mike. I consider myself a geek. I consider most of these talks to be geek-oriented. And now we're going to learn from one of our speakers how she grew up to be a geek. Please welcome the Elven cartographer, Pamela Fox.
All right, hey, I'm Pamela Fox. I've been the Google Maps API support engineer for the last 2 years, and a lot of times people ask me how I got into this crazy world of web development, so I'm going to try and boil it all down into 5 minutes for you guys. So yeah, I'm a geek, but I didn't start this fire. It's not my fault. It happened at Caltech, as all good love stories do, when two people infinitely geekier than me, fell in love. So I want to introduce you to my parents and justify their geek cred for you. Starts with my dad, Jeffrey Fox. He started in physics and then moved to computer science when he realized that he needed mad CPU cycles in order to compute all this crazy physics shit. Back then, he was doing stuff like writing the Mathematica Forerunners kernel with Stephen Wolfram and running the physics department with Feynman. Here's my mom. She was my dad's physics student, and she also does a lot of space stuff. She worked for NASA JPL and made something called the scatterometer, which is orbiting space above our heads, and I'm kind of worried that maybe it's watching me right now. So they decided to get married and have babies, but they never stopped writing research papers that had ridiculously long titles. I never knew that particle decay could provoke so many passionate nights of conception, and I'm a bit concerned that my titles are the dorkiest. So we grew up, and we were kind of oblivious to the fact that we were different, right? We didn't know it was strange that around the house, instead of having framed family photos, we had portraits of Richard Feynman and framed supercomputer chips. We also didn't know it was kind of weird that we had 6 computers and just 2 tiny little TVs. It just made family communication a lot easier. Because it was dinner time, we could just instant message upstairs and be like, Dad, it's time for dinner, come downstairs. And speaking of that, we were also the only people in the city that had a T1 connection straight to the university. To me, this was just instant popularity, right? I had so many new friends who wanted to come over and look at Backstreet Boys websites and porn. So back then, I was using all of our computers to use awesome old school computer programs like Carmen Sandiego, which I now really, really want to redo using the Maps API, and also KidPix Deluxe, which is basically Windows Paint on crack or LSD or something really strong. But one day, it was Mother's Day, and I realized I didn't have a present for my mom, so I Googled or Yahooed HTML and learned it and got this MS Word plugin called Internet Assistant. And basically, I've never bought presents since. Parents love web pages. So my dad saw this and decided to introduce me to real programming, which was Perl back then. So one New Year's Eve, instead of watching fireworks, we sat together and created my first Perl program when the clock struck midnight. It's adorable. That's the Mad Libs. So my dad was actually a huge proponent of Java back then. He thought it was the future of the internet. He still thinks that. And so he had me learn Java and run a Java academy. And this is actually where I first got asked out by my first boyfriend with a Java applet. And I said, yeah. So as kids, we had a lot of freedom. But then suddenly my dad became really strict. And he had this one rule for me that no matter what, I had to program Java that week. He wouldn't give me allowance or let me go out unless I'd program some Java. But I was in high school, so yeah, I programmed a bit, but there was so much else that I wanted to do too. So I was class president for 4 years and laid out the newspaper and did volunteerism as well. And so my dad wasn't thrilled by all this other stuff I was doing. And then afterwards, I went to USC, and I did computer science because that was still my core interest. But I still pursued other loves as well, so linguistics, animation, volunteerism, being a radical hippie, save the world. Once again, Dad wasn't that thrilled. But one day he comes to visit me at USC to give a talk about SOAP web services, which looked like gobbledygook to me then. And he looked around and saw everything I did and said, hey, maybe it's actually a good thing that you decided to do stuff other than program. So finally, I felt pretty good that I had some validation. And then I got into web APIs and mashups and learned that SOAP really is gobbledygook, but just in XML form. So it's a standard. And you can see my dad finally admitted that SOAP is it's not cool anymore. So read about the rest of my family. This is my sister. She's now in Boston doing web development with jQuery. My brother logged off Facebook before we actually created our Fox family group, so we don't actually know what he's doing. So if you see him, if you could say hi and let me know. This is my mom. She's a scientific programmer now, and she's analyzing spectral emissions from rocket emissions. So she's basically a rocket scientist. And she actually visited me the other day and said they're thinking of publishing their rocket science using Amazon EC2 and App Engine. And here is some new spawn from my dad. This is with his new wife, who was also his physics student. Bit of a pattern there. And clearly, he's trying to get her to learn programming already, but hopefully he lets her explore other interests as well. And she'll probably come up geek anyway.
Thank you very much, Pamela. In case you just came in, you're in the middle of an Ignite session. We've got 9 speakers. We just had our 3rd talk. All the talks are the same in that they're 5 minutes, 20 slides, 15 seconds of slides, and the speakers have no control. And our next speaker is a control freak and not used to this. Please meet Tim Ferriss. He's the author of The 4-Hour Workweek, and he's here to talk about practical pessimism.
All right, guys, this is not meant to be depressing. It's meant to be practical. I changed my topic a bit, so hopefully at least perhaps 1 or 2% of you will find this useful. Do a little dance. All right, so this is a photograph of Las Leñas in Argentina, where I went skiing with two close friends, one of whom recently died of pancreatic cancer. He was in his early 30s. The same day, I received an email notifying me that the 10-year-old daughter of a close friend had been diagnosed with inoperable cancer. And this was very recent, and this produced a profound sense of urgency in me to do bigger and better things in my life and to test new directions before some undefined point in the future. So I want to talk about the most effective pair of productivity techniques that I've come across since 2004 that have helped me, up to this point, test the uncommon despite the fear of ridicule, criticism, failure, and so forth. And both techniques, I cheated a bit with the format, some things will repeat, are borrowed from Stoicism, which was a school of philosophy from the Hellenistic period used by a lot of the Greco-Roman educated elite, including emperors and military and statesmen. The first is called negative visualization, and it's all related to the basic assumption that defining your fears instead of your goals is a key to doing anything uncommon, anything big. Negative visualization is what I would call preparation in practical pessimism, and that is defining in excruciating detail the worst-case scenarios. So as an anecdote, in 2004, I was working 14 hours a day in my own company, trapped in a beast of my own design, and knew that I had to take a 2 to 4 week retreat to either streamline the business and extricate myself or shut it down because there were issues with exit options. I didn't do that for 6 months because I was running an endless loop of what-if scenarios. What if I missed a notification from the IRS? What if we lost the biggest customer we have and therefore had problems A, B, and C? The problem is those fears weren't actionable, just like poorly defined goals aren't actionable. Then I came across the writings of Seneca, Lucius Seneca, who was an advisor to the emperor in his day in Rome, also what you might consider the most successful investment banker and playwright at the time in Rome. And I performed an exercise that he suggested, which was taking out a piece of paper, in my case, an 8.5 by 11 sheet one evening, and detailing in the first column all of the terrible things, the worst-case scenarios that could happen if I did what I was considering, which was this retreat. For you, it might be a change of job. It might be proposing a new project. It might be ending a relationship. It could be any number of things. All of the negative things that could happen. Second column, all of the things that I could do to minimize the likelihood of those things happening. And then the last column were all of the line-by-line actions I could take to get back to where I was then, to re-achieve the status quo, so to speak, maybe getting back into the industry that you would leave to start your own startup, whatever that might be. And in that instant, I saw that on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being most impactful, I was looking at a unlikely transient pain of about 2 and a potential life-changing permanent change of 10. And I took the trip. And that's why the book happened. That's why the World Championships in Tango happened. Everything that brought me to stand here today, I can trace back to that one evening, that one exercise. So let's move to practice. The second piece, the second technique, is rehearsing the worst-case scenarios. Seneca would put it thus: set aside a number of days each month where you are satisfied with the cheapest and scantiest of fare, meaning food, the roughest of dress, all the while asking yourself, is this the condition I feared? What you're doing is exposing yourself to negative emotions like fear, embarrassment, lack of finances, so that you're inoculated when you later have to make hard decisions, ask for hard things, or refuse things, so that you can act despite these emotions. Cato, who was viewed as Seneca as the perfect Stoic, wore darker clothing than his expected light purple, didn't go with a tunic. He was very out of style in his day. And he did so that he would learn to be ashamed of only the things that were truly shameful and to ignore the millions of things that men would otherwise have low opinions of. So it's very important that you practice your worst-case scenario. And what you'll find is that many of the fears you have are based on undervaluing the things that are easily obtainable. So those are two techniques that have resulted in the greatest gains, all of the uncommon, all of the big things I've been able to do. And I would encourage you, before trying to define your goals, to focus on defining your fears. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim. Pardon the admin time. Our next speaker is going to talk about something that's near and dear to, I'm sure, many of your hearts, and that is scaling. Please welcome Nitin.
So this is about the Twitter flame wars that started last year when Twitter first had some scaling problems. And it's about a principle that I derived from listening to all of that stuff and trying to get underneath and trying to find the fundamental principles by first clearing your mind and trying to get to the bottom of things, and by trying to find fundamental principles that are independent of technology or specific technology or specific languages and so forth. And this is what all of that sounded like to me, because these were specific phrases that were used when people were yelling at each other. There's a lot of emotion and things like that. And underneath all that, there was some discussions about engineering. And at some point, I started to get beyond this and started to hear some stuff that had to do with engineering. But still, there wasn't anything there that I could see was a fundamental principle. And I wished I could be like that dog in that famous cartoon where people are yelling at the dog, and the dog is just hearing the stuff that the dog wants to hear. So for you visual learners, something here. And again, so focusing down and trying to distill that to fundamental principles, I began to hear something that to the database person sounded like people were talking only about what I call the physical model, which is just about implementation. And they weren't talking too much about design. In the database world, we talk about physical model and the logical model, which is the abstract structure of the data. And I didn't hear too much about database design, and I didn't hear too much about queries and stuff. And so that's what I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to talk less about all of the stuff that was talked about earlier. So we take a simple query that happens in two different cases. During Flickr in 2005 had a problem with their servers, and their servers were crashing because of a query that had to do with groups. And it turns out a very similar query is the query that's causing Twitter to crash in 2008. And I extracted out what is common in both of these queries, and turns out that there's a problem of visibility. There are two people. One person is publishing some content with some restrictions, like groups or blocking users in the case of Twitter. The other user says, what can I see? And that's the common query in all of this. And what causes scaling problems in all of these queries is a self-join on a million-row user table. And that's at the core of this problem. And you don't see this in outside social networks because in the enterprise, you don't have million-row user tables. And in the enterprise, you have more hierarchical structures. That's what the enterprise looks like, and that's what a social network looks like. And you can't really break it down and partition it, and so I call it shard nothing. And that's got lots of many-to-many relationships. That's got a lot of one-to-many relationships. And so let's get back to basics and do some science and see what have you got that's good. So RAM and cores, good. And query cost, lots of users. N squared in the denominator, bad. And so I created a formula that I call data crunching power. And you divide RAM times core by N squared. And so if you've got a lot of good stuff, you got a lot of data crunching power. If you've got bad stuff, well, your servers are going to crash. And so you're going to say, okay, I'm just going to put a lot of servers on here. I'm going to put a lot of cores, but you've got a problem. And so you've got to stay far away from that intersection point. And you can do that by trying to keep shifting this curve over on the other side by adding more servers. But you've got to really reduce the amount of data you're dealing with by going down. And so I pulled my friend's timeline from Twitter and put it on my laptop. And I said, let's see what queries I can do on it versus what Twitter can do for me. And so those are the numbers from 2008. And Twitter had a single 8-core server with 64 gig of RAM or something. Put it into my formula, and guess what comes out? Look at the stuff on the right. My laptop has a 100,000 times advantage over Twitter when it's dealing with my data. So clearly not with all of the data, but just with my data. So I can do more stuff with my data. And then Twitter can do with my data on Twitter. And of course, Twitter can do search, and they can do trends and all this stuff. And I can't do that. So the principle here is that you ought to be taking your own data back. But right now you can't shard this. So Hidden in here is another solution, which I call shard everything. So you take every user's data and you give it to them to munch on their laptop, and then the vendor just does all of the aggregate stuff like search and trends and all of the stuff that are very simple queries that can be done on data warehouses and stuff like that. And all of that comes out of a law that I call the scaling law of gravity, because you can't escape it. And it's an inverse square law, but also because my name sounds like Newton and I did this on an apple. So.
Thank you very much, Nitin. Our next speaker asks, why are we bigoted about social networks? And I would argue that one of the reasons is because many of them are slow, and that might be why we choose one over the other. But I'm sure Kevin has his own reasons, so please let's welcome Kevin Marks.
Thank you. This is something I started noticing a while ago, which is that people are very insular, but it manifests itself in social networks particularly. So I picked a few quotes out of the press that covers this. This is Pete Cashmore of Mashable, referring to Orkut as Orkut's Brazilian drug dealers as a collective noun for the Orkut users. That one surprised me. I thought, okay, maybe this is just xenophobia. If you think about, this is a Le Mans view of social networks, and each one takes over a different country, and they're obviously very nationalistic, and there's this sort of great sort of imperialist thing going on here where each social network invades a place and takes it over, and therefore, obviously, you resent ones that happen in other countries. So that's one thing. But then Marshall did this last week, and he said, MySpace is like a bratty little sister wearing too little clothing. So there's something else going on there than just sort of xenophobia. There's some, is this got sister problems? Then I read Michael Wolff. Now this is really impressive. He says, if you're on MySpace, you're a cretin, you're a poor cretin, nobody beyond an 8th grade level of education on MySpace, it's for backwards people. So there's something stronger than just little sisters here. If you look at the social networks and their growth over time, they've spread out, they started out with a few, 15 years ago, and they've grown up gradually, and there are lots of different ones. And they end up having different feels to them. Here's one more from the Times. He's talking about Twitter. He says, typical profile follower is someone young who feels marginalized, empty, and pointless. They don't have an inner life. So it's fear of the other is what's going on here. This is XKCD's map of social networks, and it says they're not like countries. Well, they're kind of like countries. You sort of explore them. They take up space, and you kind of know they exist, but you've only been to one or two of them. You might visit one of them. You have friends who live there and say it's a great place to holiday. And he's something like this. He says, I'm waiting for the day when, if you tell someone from the internet, instead of laughing, they just ask, well, which part? And I think that's sort of getting closer to this. What happens is we only see a different web. We each see something different. We're all looking at our own little filter on the web now. We don't have a shared public in the way we thought we did when we had was newspapers and television, and we could assume that people had seen the same thing as we had done. The idea of there being one public and then lots of little privates is not there anymore. What we have is many publics. We all have our own view of the web. We can't all see the same thing. And if you look at the social networks that are successful, they reflect this by showing us all different views of it. If you look at Twitter, everyone sees something different. And there are more social networks out there than you know. Now, I thought I knew this field, and I keep finding 30 million user social networks that are signing up for open social that I hadn't previously heard of. So what's happening with the Le Mans thing is actually that these social networks are growing organically. They're spreading through friendship groups. They're growing out. People have passed them on to their friends, and they're not overlapping much. And then they bump into the existing cultural boundaries that are there. And we don't really want hundreds of social network sites. None of us want to sign up and fill in forms for more than a few. We really don't want to have to go through this process again and again and again. So that's... we want to be able to reuse the ones we've got. And we're starting to see this now. In the last few weeks, we've seen FriendFeed let you sign up with other social networks. We've got Friend Connect that lets you do that across many social sites. So you can bring the places you've already got sets of friends and social network stuff to the rest of the web. We've got a set of open standards to do this. They're starting to show up in actual real-world action. Even Facebook is now adopting this for logging in, which surprised me, as they don't let you take any data out. but we're extending the networks across the web, and we're creating activities that then flow back from our explorations of the web, from our publics, to our friends in the social networks, feeding the stuff back to them so they can share in what we're seeing, so that we can actually connect across the web in this way. So the challenge is always who you trust. Douglas Adams warns that deciding who to trust is what a large part of our brains is for, and we can't really delegate that to the computers. The computers can't model this very well. But what they can have is they can have a list of people that we know with photographs and names next to them attached to the information, and then we can use our brains to decide what to trust. So we can use the standards for the social networking to connect people across the web, but rely on our own mental models of whom to trust and have people attach the information so that we can filter the information ourselves through the network of our friendships across the web, and hopefully end some of this bigotry about other people elsewhere being different and nasty and strange. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And Kevin is the one who arranged for us to do this today, so let's just give him an extra hand. And our next speaker is going to talk about not the needs of the consumer, not the needs of the enterprise, but instead the needs of NGOs and developing countries. Please welcome Andrew Hatton on Coding Against Cholera.
Thank you. Hi. This isn't a Google product, so I hope no alarms are going to go off here. And this is a bit of a sell, so apologies in advance. I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about clever plastic and cool code, or coding against cholera. So I work for Oxfam, which is an NGO, international NGO. Now, I'm not meaning to offend anyone with this question, but really I just want to make the point that something that we see as kind of treatable and trivial in a sense actually kills a lot of people. Second leading cause of death among children under 5. A major cause of that is the cholera bacteria. And many of the places where we work, we find that the cholera bacteria is there, overcrowded camps, spreads very, very quickly, and it can kill people very quickly. The treatment, however, is really well known how to handle this. Something that we call WATSAN, or clean water, good sanitation, and then, of course, kind of best practice in terms of hygiene standards. So it is kind of very well established how to manage this stuff. Now, we've got some really good frontline tools in the war against disease like cholera. One is the bucket over here, which I've been walking around the conference center trying to promote it in front of all of the video cameras. And then the other was the toilet. Now, I'm calling this Bucket 3.0. So we've already made a start there on a lot of the technology companies. Bucket 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and that's the best bucket. Award-winning bucket this is now. We recently won an award with this. So some of the kind of key features with this bucket, it's got a good lid, it's got very thick plastic, it's UV resistant, so bacteria and algae won't grow inside, and it's got also a tap there so you can measure your water out very carefully, and it stacks, so it can be transported very easily. So we're going to write a quick app, and we're going to get this bucket out to somewhere that needs it. We work in 72 countries around the world. In our case study now, we're going to get it to the DRC, or Democratic Republic of Congo. So that's where we're going to send our bucket and write an app for them to order that bucket. Congo recently came out of conflict. There are still up to 1 million people living in camps for displaced people. So the kind of conditions where you're going to get disease spreading very, very quickly, people are going to be suffering. One of the key technical challenges, or the first that we have in working somewhere like DRC, is bandwidth. Light blue is bad, so Congo is bad. Basically, our only option there is a VSAT connection, pretty much. There are some movements happening to make that better, but it's still very poor. So the kind of connection speeds that we're going to see are pretty low, 450 kilobits per second, obviously much, much lower than we're used to in the West. So that's going to be a challenge. One of the main challenges around those type of connections is latency. And I don't know if anyone here has had a VoIP over a really poor latent connection, then you'll kind of know what that is like. And the message will be distorted. Although, interestingly, you'll recognize that line, Obama's recent inauguration speech, kind of works pretty much however much you chop that message up, which I thought was quite interesting. Our approach to the app is going to be based on simplicity, very simple workflow, just a couple of steps. have an offline option as well, so an offline client, and deliver across multiple clients, so mobile. Security, very important. Different languages we need to support, and of course search. Good findability for the data is very important. So those things are all going to basically be our requirements, if you like. Our approach to training is going to almost be like kind of viral. We'll train a couple of people up, they'll train a couple of people up, and they'll train a couple of people up. So you kind of spread the message basically quickly and cheaply as you can. So all of these things go into our sausage machine, or the appropriate app engine, otherwise known as a developer. A couple of other inputs in there might be chocolate and money, because they like those as well. And out at the end, you get your sausage, or you get your appropriate app for this particular scenario. So just summarize, the appropriate app is low bandwidth friendly, copes with poor latency, so not a chatty application, printer friendly, offline mode, secure, multilingual, minimal workflow. So diarrhea kills, but can we beat it? Yes, we can. Basic hygiene goes a long way, well-designed water carrier, and bandwidth is scarce, so we're going to design an appropriate app. So those are the key kind of things that we want to achieve. Just very quickly, some useful links there, slightly odd formatting, but just kind of illustrate some of the bandwidth maps that kind of show the bandwidth situation. And then maybe just one last thought before we go. That really is my kind of conclusion of happiness. Someone mentioned what their conclusion was of happiness earlier, but kind of a humorous, making a serious point with humor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got 2 more talks, and in case you just walked in, everybody gets just 20 slides, 15 seconds a slide, and they have no control. And our next speaker predicted the future about 5 years ago, and he's here to talk about the short film Epic and how to forecast the future in the future. For you to do that anyway.
Hi, everybody. I'm Robin, and I'm going to talk about how to predict the future. My goal is to give you 3 simple tools you can use in your life, your work, to sort of improve the way that you think about what happens next. Why am I qualified to talk about this? I'm not. But to the degree that anyone is, I actually had an experience predicting the future. I made a short movie called Epic 2014 back in 2004 with a friend of mine named Matt Thompson. It was about the future of news, and its core argument was that that future is actually more in the hands of companies like Google's on than it is the New York Times. Google's on, of course, being the company that sort of emerged from the merger of Google and Amazon in 2012. So millions of people actually watched this video, which was a lot in the pre-YouTube days, and I'm going to come back to it. Got emailed around, got IM'd, got shown at conferences like this. I'm going to come back to it. First, I want to talk about tip number 1. Philip Tetlock, pictured here in the center, is a researcher at UC Berkeley who has done a radical thing when it comes to the future. He has run an experiment. He's been distributing surveys to thousands of experts, people in the military, people in the academy, asking them for quantitative, predictions about the future. He's been doing it for over 20 years, and he's discovered something about the predictions and the kind of people who make predictions. He breaks them down into 2 groups. These are actually Isaiah Berlin's categories: hedgehogs and foxes. Now, hedgehogs are big thinkers. They're people with big ideas. They like big theories. They're visionaries, and hedgehogs can change the world, but they're really bad at predicting the future. On the other hand, there's a kind of person who he calls foxes. Foxes actually hate theories. They hate extrapolating too much at all. They like taking things on a case-by-case basis. They really like the specifics, and they're much better at predicting the future. So when you think about the future, think about specifics and listen to foxes, not hedgehogs. So there's a historian named Neil Ferguson. This is number 2, pictured here. He actually agrees with Phil Tetlock on another issue. They both think that the practice of history needs to involve something called counterfactual. Something funny happens on the way to the future. It seems all strange and unpredictable until we get there, and then it happens and it seems obvious in retrospect. This is a huge fallacy. The practice of counterfactual says, let's take all of our smarts, all of the research and rigor that we apply to history, and use it to think about all the things that could have happened. Why is this the Google I.O. conference? Why isn't it the Yahoo I.O. conference? Why isn't it the Google's On I.O. conference? Why isn't it the New York Times I.O. conference? All of these sort of carry interesting things. If we can understand those possible futures, we can understand ourselves better. This begins to sound a lot like science fiction, and this is tip number 3. Read science fiction. Now, you're not going to read it because it's right. No, science fiction is totally written by hedgehogs. But the important thing is that lots of people also read science fiction. Designers, developers, inventors, entrepreneurs, the people who are going to make the future are reading this stuff. It's like a slow-ticking time bomb. Here's 2 books that I recommend you should read right now. Demon by Daniel Suarez and Feed by M.T. Anderson. Now, I have a confession to make. Going back to Epic 2014, Matt Thompson and I did not make a movie in the first place. We made a slideshow. And it was very rigorous. It had, numbers and charts and graphs and sort of made this argument. It was the same argument. It was the same prediction about the future, but it was totally boring. People couldn't get through it. It definitely was not going to go viral. This is an important insight. Stories are powerful. And I actually think this is an important theme for a group like this. People who prize numbers, who like rigor, who like quantitative stuff, tend to be really bad at telling stories. Makes me think of somebody like this. This is Al Gore. He's actually my boss. He co-founded Current, the company where I work. He's been talking about the future for a long time, talking about the planet, the environment, what's going to happen. Not always the best results. It wasn't until he wrapped those predictions up in a story, a really scary story about what's going to happen, that things actually started to change. You could say that this was really just the right prediction at the right time. I think the fact that it's a story is important. When you tell a good story, history can sometimes bend around it. So coming back to finish up the story of Epic 2014, about a year after we made it, there was this article in the Financial Times. It was about Rupert Murdoch, and how Rupert Murdoch was completely changing the strategy at News Corporation because he realized they had missed the boat on the internet. A couple graphs down, there's this line. Mr. Murdoch is understood to have seen the film and taken note. We were like, what? So, to sum up, number 1, when you're thinking about the future, listen to foxes, not hedgehogs. You should prize specifics over grand theories. Number 2, think counterfactually. Keep alive that question, how else might things have been? Number 3, read science fiction, not because it's right, but because everybody else is reading it too. And here's the trick. I actually think the best way to predict the future is to predict the future and tell a story about it, a really compelling, convincing, passionate, scary, exciting story. Other people will have to pay attention, and then who knows? That might become the future, because you never know who's paying attention.
Thank you very much, Robin. And we've got just one more talk, and she's going to tell you the story of how to be awesome. Please welcome Kathy Sierra.
So if we want to create passionate users, we have to help them get better. So nobody's passionate about things they suck at. And if we can help them have more resolution, richer, deeper, better experiences, we have a chance of getting them passionate. But I know there are a whole bunch of you here that still have your cameras set to automatic program mode, even though you have shutter speed and aperture control. So if we could unlock that door for our users and help them be awesome, what would that mean to them? Well, if you read Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, you've seen that 10,000 hours number. It takes 10,000 hours to get really good at something. That's really depressing. So one way we can minimize that is to be practicing all the time. So I'm trying to get really good at horses. That's my desk chair. That's an actual saddle. So I'm practicing. I'm getting in my 10,000 hours while working on the computer. I know some people are kind of creeped out by that, but it's actually awesome. Another way we can help our users to cut down that 10,000 hour time frame is to give them patterns. Experts, people who are awesome at something, have patterns. They use rules. They have an 80-20. Give people what's the one thing you can do to be amazing. Another one is get better gear. Spend the money. And offer better gear and higher-end equipment to your users. It just works. So you think that if you get a big monitor and a bunch of displays, you'll be a hacker god. If you do that, the problem is when we have better equipment, everyone else who has to pay for it, this is what they see. And someone at Google has to calculate the odds because this slide was in the last person's presentation. But anyway, you'll see more pixels. So give people a way to justify the better gear that you're offering them. Now, motivation is also really important. I mean, I think now today's competitive advantage is just making the product that people will actually use. Your treadmill is not in the corner gathering dust because you don't use it. You don't use it because it's in the corner. So, make the right thing easy for people and the wrong thing hard. So now let's look at the anti-patterns, things that we do that really help create our users sucking as opposed to getting better. And I don't know why that's a bunny bath. But anyway, this is the single biggest problem that most of us have, is we focus on the tool, not the thing our users want to do with the tool. That's the biggest block to getting people interested and passionate and engaged. And especially in this case, we treat people really well before they buy, and then afterwards we treat them poorly. This is also the reason people don't want to upgrade. If we really want to help people upgrade, which they're going to need to do to go forward, we have to accept that it's a loss for them. It's a hit to their self-esteem every time they upgrade, and we just tell them to get over it. This is the other reason that people don't want to upgrade and move forward, because we write the FAQs and the help and the manuals as though they were intellectually curious and using a tablet PC. But the real reason is because they're consulting help because they are having a horrible experience. But this is not the right answer either. You don't feel awesome because you're not awesome if you master something because a 3-year-old could master it. So don't let the ease of use police step in and dumb something down. That's not an answer. This is also a really, really bad solution, which is to hire a social media consultant. And some of my best friends are social media consultants, but it is out of control, because it's completely focusing in the wrong direction. This is the social media consultant fantasy. The goal is to get users to love us. That's such a ridiculously bad goal. Nobody is awesome because they love you because you're nice. So, someone tweeted that, the holy grail is if your users want to party with you. That's a bad idea. You want your users to party because of you, without you. So put users with other users, not connecting users to the company. This is a fantasy also. This is not going to happen. Great use of social media is to find out what role we play in our users' lives and what role our competitors play in our users' lives. Use social media to look for pain and pleasure, and those are the things that we can tweak and exploit to help them be awesome. Another thing we can do, another anti-pattern, is that by trying to be really competitive and focusing on our competitors, we end up being uncompetitive because we end up with things like featureitis. We start building the very things that harm users. The best thing we can do, and this is a great use of social media, look at what the bigger, cooler thing is, the world that our product and our competitors' products exist in. That bigger, cooler thing, that's what people want to kick ass at, not your tool. So blog about that. Tweet about that. Use social media about that. In the social marketing world, you hear the word WOM, word of mouth. That's supposed to be the holy grail. But really, there's something much better than that most of us are able to do. And that's WOFO. If your users are so good, you get word of effing obvious. And you all have the chance to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. That concludes Ignite. Thanks for joining. All the speakers want to just stand up and get us another round of applause. Soak it up. And I'm Brady Forrest. If you want to start an Ignite in your town, it's easy. And just ping me and I'll tell you how.